Computer. Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm Ken Knabb, and as most of you probably know, we're discussing my new book, The Joy of Revolution and Related Texts. And this is the last meeting. We had 3 meetings discussing the joy of revolution itself, and then uh, we have 3 meetings discussing the so-called related texts, and we did 2 of those in the last 2 meetings, where we had some earlier texts about some stuff in France and uh, discussion of primitivism and so on. And our last meeting was all texts about the Occupy movement in 2011 and 2012. And so the final texts that I had here were texts that I did in the last 10 years or so. And there are 4 of them. And as it happened, this was not my choice, but it's the world that I happen to be living in. 3 of them were about Trump because this was such a significant thing. I really couldn't get away with it and talk about more pleasant things. So I had a first, uh, I'll call them leaflets, but there were texts that I, posted online in 2016, just after Trump was elected for the first time. Uh, and then in 2020, there was a text I wrote just a little bit after the COVID shutdown had kicked in. And then in 2024, I had another one when Trump was amazingly reelected. And then a year later, I wrote a further Trump thing about how things had been developing in that second term, which had been rather even worse than the first term and different. So uh, I'm just going to, so we have those 4 things to discuss, and I think it's simplest if we do them in order, chronological order. So I'll just read a few passages from some of these. So this is the 2016 thing, which I called Out in the Open, Remarks on the Trump Election. And my gist about this was that this was kind of an ugly, crazy event that he was elected. I think most people did not think that such a completely crazy person would be. Um, but uh, part of my gist about this text is, okay, he's elected. This is weird, but we know all the bad things about this, like, oh, what's he going to do about this and all that. But I adopted the tactic in this to take a tentatively optimistic view. And I'm saying, okay, this is bad, but I said the downside of Trump's victories are numerous and all too obvious, but I'd like to point out a few possible upsides. Um, In a previous text, I noted that the Trump campaign was accelerating the self-destruction of the Republican Party. I was assuming he would probably lose and that there would be a bitter civil war over who was to blame, making it difficult for them to regroup and write it off as a one-time fluke. But I think his victory will be even worse for the Republicans. This may seem like an odd thing to say, considering that the Republicans now have the presidency as well as both houses of Congress. But I think it's going to be like the proverbial dog chasing a car. What happens if the dog actually catches the car? And so I go into things like, okay, you have this total power in this party, whereas the usual deal is that the Democrats and Republicans are splitting. Maybe one is the president, but somebody else has the Congress or the Senate or whatever. And they can each blame each other for screwing up and not passing some law. But once the Republicans were in total control, all eyes are on them. Okay, what are you going to do? You've been promising that we will abolish, this or institute this. And I go through a number of things there. like, uh, are you going to follow through on this? Are you going to abolish Medicare? Are you going to blah, blah, blah? You know, how are you going to? So I point out that a lot of these things that their eyes will be upon them, that they're not going to be able to follow through because they have no idea how to do it to begin with. And so, and then I conclude that part about the Republicans by saying, and this whole show is so public. I'm talking about 2 or 3 weeks into the election, so he's not there, but we've already seen him nominate cabinet people and all this. I said, by contrast, Obama's smooth, genial persona enabled him to get away with war crimes, massive deportations, and all sorts of corporate compromises, not a single criminal banker prosecuted, parentheses, with few people paying attention and fewer still protesting. This will not be the case with President Ubu, President Trump, but you know the Ubu character is this kind of Trump-like uh, character. President Ubu and his clown car administration. The whole world will be watching, and every detail will be scrutinized and debated. It's going to look as ugly as it is in reality. And you're going to, I'm talking to a hypothetical Republican politician, and you're going to be forever tarred by this association. You're no longer in the Republican Party, you're in the Trump Party. You bought it, you own it. If I'm that imagined Republican politician, I don't think I feel very confident about the future of my party. And then I spend the second half of the leaflet saying, laying into the Democrats, saying, obviously, it was thoroughly their fault that such a complete absurdity happened, you know, that they couldn't even do this. They're focusing the blame on this or that kind of thing. But I say this election shouldn't have been close enough for any of those things to matter. The Democrats were running against the most glaringly unqualified candidate in American history. It should have been a landslide. With Bernie Sanders, it probably would have been. A post-election national poll showed him beating Trump 56 to 44. He was by far the most popular candidate in the country, while Hillary Clinton's approval rating was almost as negative as Trump's. And I just go into laying in here, uh, uh, so on. But the Democratic Party establishment preferred to risk losing with a loyal machine candidate, Hillary, rather than to risk winning with an independent radical whose movement might have challenged their cushy positions. Despite the fact that so I go on to go into all the things that were problematic about Hillary, both things that were actually problematic and things that were bullshit but could be made to look bad. Um, and so I said her campaign mostly amounted to business as usual. Quote, I paraphrase, defend the status quo. You have to vote for me because my opponent is even worse. So that was basically the Democrats' strategy there, and we saw how it worked. Um, so then I continue um, saying new movements of protest and resistance will develop during the coming weeks and months, responding to this bizarre and still very unpredictable new situation. And then I go on to say, well, we don't really know what's going to happen there, but one thing I could predict is that everybody has sort of spontaneously uh, picked up the number one thing we need to do is things like protecting immigrants and other people who are threatened by the new thing. So that turned out to be the case. And then I went on to say, meanwhile, you know, we also have to defend ourselves and not get totally freaked out by this thing, continue, you know, to live our lives and do this ultimately. So that is, I said, let's treat this clown show with the contempt it deserves and not forget the fundamental things that still apply. Picking our battles, but also continuing to nourish the personal relations and creative activities that might make life worthwhile in the first place. Otherwise, what will we be defending? And so on. So I think I'll stop there and we can have a brief talk, and there, bear in mind, we'll be continuing this in the following things. But if anybody has any comments, try to put yourself back in 2016 or 17. Any comments about that text or the things that I brought up? Judy, unmute yourself.
We've had this disagreement before, Ken, about whether Hillary or Bernie should have won that election. And I mean, the same polls that said Bernie was ahead also at times said Hillary was ahead.
No, no.
Okay,
Hillary was running close. Hillary was never ahead like 56 to 44.
okay, but my point is that it was before the election. We don't know what they would have done to Bernie if he had been nominated. I mean, you can't
True,
predict how an election is going to turn out.
true,
And
true.
and I think the reason Hillary got defeated because she was one of the most qualified candidates we've had, in spite of the fact that she did have baggage and she was part of the establishment, no question. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You know, she might have been able to get a lot of things done. We'll never know. But anyway, I think a lot of it was misogyny. You know, people would not vote for a woman. Hillary was a really
Mhm.
strong character, and she defied a lot of conventions in her marriage and all kinds of things, and people couldn't stand it. It just drove people crazy. I mean, just like Kamala, that was a whole different scenario there, but it certainly didn't help that she was a black woman. People are not
Right,
Misogyny is alive and well, and I think that's the main reason why Hillary didn't get it nominated, because you know, if you think about it, things have changed tremendously for women within the last 40, 50 years. You know, when I was a little girl, women were either nurses or teachers, and that was it. You know, as I came up, well, now we've got lawyers, doctors, women are can just do about anything. And but men, it hasn't really changed for men much. You know, and there's sort of a vacuum there. I think, and a
well,
lot of men are really
okay. I think we can agree that yes, there is a lot of
anyway,
misogyny.
my point is we don't really know
True.
about that election.
Yeah. Uh, any other questions or comments? Okay, we will be coming back to some of these, but I now,
Mary has her real hand up.
oh, okay. Mary, unmute yourself, come forth.
I changed my mind. It's just going to be comments like Judy's. That's all. That's okay.
Okay,
Change my
you can
mind.
always come back. We're going to basically be discussing the same thing practically the whole time. But for a little relief, it's kind of funny. Like we have four texts here. Three of them are about a person, more or less, a political thing, and one of them is about uh, a plague. And the one about the plague is actually much more upbeat. I mean, is that weird or not? So, when,
Well, actually, all four of them are about a plague.
yeah, exactly. Uh, but this was like a literal plague hit, and it was actually more fun, like for me for us to go through, I think, actually. And it was more fun to write. It was more interesting because there were a lot of positive things going on. And so this was early 2020, and Trump was still president, but it was his final year. And right in you know, when that was happening, COVID came in. We had maybe heard about it December or November the previous year as this distant thing. But early in 2020, early 2020, like in January, we started hearing about it a lot. Like there are some cases in the United States already, and da da da, what are we going to do? And we would hear about certain other countries, like Italy was in real bad shape. There were thousands of people dying there, and etc. And so it kind of hit, I guess you would say, officially, I think in what was it,
March.
March, um, and so officially in the sense that there were closings ordered by either the government or the state governments, and you know, a lot of like certain stores where you couldn't have them, and I think they started, you know, you couldn't have a concert or a theater where a lot of people are crowded and so on. So when it became pretty obvious that this was going to be going on for a while, uh, I started, you know, writing this piece, which I ended up calling Pregnant Pause: Remarks on the Corona Crisis. And I start out going, uh, making some comments about the external politics, like what was going on, like what different laws were being proposed to deal with it, or policies, and so on. But right from the get-go, I said, uh, we were already living in a general global crisis, but most people were only vaguely aware of it, since it was manifested in a confusing array of particular crises: social, political, economic, environmental. Climate change is the most momentous of these crises, but it is so complicated and so gradual that it has been easy for most people to ignore it. The corona crisis has been sudden, undeniable, and inescapable. It is also taking place in an unprecedented context. If this crisis had taken place 50 or 60 years ago, we would have been totally at the mercy of the mass media, reading about it in newspapers or magazines, or sitting in front of a radio or television, passively absorbing whatever instructions and reassurances were broadcast by politicians or newscasters, with scarcely any opportunity to respond, except perhaps to write a letter to the editor and hope it got printed. Back then, governments could get away with such things like the Gulf of Tonkin incident, because it was months or years before the truth eventually got out. The development of social media during the last 2 decades has, of course, dramatically changed this. Although the mass media remain powerful, their monopolistic impact has been weakened and circumvented as more and more people have engaged in the new interactive means of communication. These new means were soon put to radical uses, such as rapidly exposing political lies and scandals that previously would have remained hidden, and they eventually played a crucial role in triggering and coordinating the Arab Spring and Occupy movements of 2011. A decade later, they've become routine for a large portion of the global population. As a result, this is the first time in history that such a momentous event has taken place, with virtually everyone on Earth aware of it at the same time. That's italicized. And it is playing out while much of humanity is obliged to stay at home, where they can hardly avoid reflecting on the situation and sharing their reflections with others. So then I go on to, so people are talking about this by the millions, maybe even billions, routinely every day, what's going on. And so I then spend roughly the first half of this text going into some specifics about, you know, what does it mean when you've got tens of millions of people unemployed because their jobs have gotten cut off, you know. Um, and what does it mean? You know, like uh, the system isn't geared up to deal with that. It's also not geared up to deal with the pandemic as such, partly because Trump, you know, sabotaged the very mechanisms that would have dealt with it. So then I go into some things about, you know, there was a class division, like certain people were holed up at home and it was inconvenient, but it was usually comfortable. And then other people were still working. And these were the very people at minimum wage things that, you know, can't even get the minimum wage raised. And they're the ones, ironically, that suddenly everybody was depending on a delivery boy, you know, or, you know, a clerk in a store or something like this to do these different things. And they were at risk and they were getting COVID more than other people did, et cetera. So anyway, I go on talking about these and how workers have reacted to that. There were a lot of strikes going on and so on. And there are debates about how much, you know, when can you go back to so-called normal and so on. So then about halfway through my text, I say, I mentioned some links below. If you went to the actual text on my website, I have a whole lot of links and I have lists of memes and links to skits and songs and lots of articles from different angles about the shutdown and so on. But at this point, I'd like to step back and look at what I consider the most significant aspect of this whole situation, the experience of the shutdown itself. This experience is so unprecedented and it is changing so dramatically from day to day that we still don't quite know what to think of it. I mean, remember what you felt like in April 2020. You know, you really didn't know, like, is everybody going to die? uh, you know, like the Black Death in Europe or something like that, or what there was, uh, you know, when are things going to get back to normal and, you know, all this. And we literally didn't know what was going to happen. Uh, so I continue. We keep secretly hoping we'll wake up and discover that it was just a nightmare, but each morning it's still here. But as we have gradually gotten at least somewhat used to it, it is offering its own revelations in addition to those earlier political revelations. Any pause may give us time to reflect on our lives and reassess our priorities. But knowing that everyone else is doing this at the same time gives these reflections a more collective focus. This pause is shaking us out of our usual habits and presumptions and giving each and all of us a rare chance to see our lives and our society in a fresh light. As each day brings fresh news, things seem to be speeding up. Yet so many things have stopped or at least drastically slowed down, it also sometimes seems like everything is in slow motion, or as if we'd all been sleepwalking and were suddenly awakened, looking around at each other in amazement at the strange new reality and how it contrasts with what we previously considered normal. We come to realize how much we miss certain things, but also that there are things we don't miss. Many people have noted, usually with a half-guilty hesitation, since they are, of course, quite aware of the devastation that is going on in many other people's lives, that they personally are appreciating the experience in some regards. It's much quieter. The skies are clearer. There's scarcely any traffic. Fish are returning to formerly polluted waterways. In some cities, wild animals are venturing into the empty streets. There has been much joking about how those who like quiet contemplative living are hardly noticing any difference. in contrast to the frustrations and anxieties of those who are used to more gregarious lifestyles. In any case, whether they like it or not, millions of people are getting a crash course in cloistered living, with repeated daily schedules almost like monks in a monastery. They may continue to distract themselves with entertainments, but the reality keeps bringing them back to the present moment. I suspect that the frantic urgency of various political leaders to get things, quote, back to normal as soon as possible is not only for the ostensible economic reasons, but also because they dimly sense that the longer this pause goes on, the more people will become detached from the addictive consumer pursuits of their previous lives, and the more they will be open to exploring new possibilities. One of the first things that many people have noticed is that the social distancing, however frustrating it may be in some regards, is ironically bringing people closer together in spirit. As people get a new appreciation of what others mean to them, they are sharing their thoughts and feelings more intently and more widely than ever, personally via phone calls and emails, collectively via social media. Many of the things shared are, of course, pretty modest or ordinary, reassuring each other that we're doing okay or not, comparing notes about how to deal with this or that inconvenience, recommending films or music or books we've been binging on. But people are also coming up with memes, jokes, essays, poems, songs, satires, skits. However amateurish many of these things may be, the ensemble effect of thousands of these personal expressions being shared all over the globe is in some way more moving than watching professional performances under ordinary circumstances. The simplest and most common social media posts have been memes, short standalone statements or captions added to illustrations. In contrast to political slogans, traditional ones, vehemently for or against something, these memes typically have a more deadpan tone with an ironical twist, leaving it up to the reader to recognize the contradictions being revealed. And I go on to compare them with the graffiti in May 68 that were somewhat analogous. Let's see here. At the same time, millions of people are using this pause to investigate and critique the system's fiascos. And they are doing this at a time when practically everyone else in the world is obsessively focused on the same issues. I think this first ever global discussion about our society is potentially more important than the particular crisis that happened to trigger it. It's admittedly a very confused and chaotic discussion taking place within the even more chaotic background noise of billions of people's ongoing individual concerns. But the point is that anyone can take part whenever they wish and potentially have some impact. They can post their own ideas, or if they see some other idea or article they agree with, they can email the link to their network of friends or share it on Facebook or other social media. And if other people agree that it is pertinent, they may be in turn share it with their friends and so on. And within a few days, millions of people may be aware of it and able to further share or adapt it or critique it. This discussion is, of course, far from being a democratic decision-making process. Nothing is being decided beyond vague fluctuations of the popularity of this or that meme or idea. If a significant global movement comes out of this crisis, it will need to develop more rigorous ways to determine and coordinate the actions that the participants feel are appropriate, and it will obviously not want its communications to depend on privately owned and manipulated media platforms as they do now. But meanwhile, we have to work with what we've got on this terrain where virtually everyone in the world is already connected, however superficially. It's already a big first step that everyone is able to personally weigh in instead of leaving things to leaders and celebrities. To go further, we need to be aware that this is happening, aware that what is going on within us and among us is potentially more promising than all the farcical political dramas we are watching so intently. So then I point out, as many people had, like, not only can we not get, do we not want to get back to normal? We can't get back to normal. It will never quite be the same afterwards. So I end up, the corona crisis and the climate change crisis are very different in timing and in scale. The first one is sudden and fast moving. Every day of delay means thousands of additional deaths. The second is far more gradual, but also far more momentous. Every year of delay will probably mean millions of additional deaths, along with a miserable existence for those who survive under such dystopic conditions. But this shock we are now experiencing is also an opportunity for a new beginning. Hopefully, we may one day look back and see it as the wake-up call that managed to bring humanity to its senses before it was too late. So, any comments on that text or that topic? Mike? We're not hearing you.
I notice you are emphasizing the positive, but there were in Perth anyway. There were fights in the aisles of the grocery stores over toilet paper supply, and then there was the other part that was made all too aware, and that was the social paranoia that had developed over the years, and basically took over the anti-vaccination kind of crowd, and that and that those were basically the kind of reactionary and libertarian ways of uh, opposing the what was being done to try to deal with the disease.
Right.
Um, yeah, and it wasn't a minor thing. It exposed how politically ignorant so many people are in various places, including Australia of all places. Jeez. So that I mean, personally, I welcomed the shutdown because I live under an airline approach to the airport kind of place. There were no airplanes flying over for days, and that was it was such a welcome, and everything was silent. Oh, was wonderful, but yeah. Anyway, that's just an observation about what you're saying.
No.
But I think it goes to the root of my own personal thing that I always emphasize, and that's the lack of political and economic awareness about how the wage system actually works, and that's how things are. That's why we always after these crises end up going back to where we were before, because we don't we're not really engaged in a class conscious praxis to abolish wage labor. We just want it to go on, and we want it to be like all idealists. We want it to be fair and just, and we want to get rid of the bad guys and get the good guys in. We don't see the systemic nature of what was going on.
So
Anyway,
do some of the other of you have memories of being under the Kirsty?
Yeah, I was, I would second what, I mean, I loved reading this because it reminded me of everything that it seems we've all forgotten now. And I was sort of scanning through all the links you have on your website to what look like really interesting articles about, the possibilities of this moment and remembering all the nature coming back and things like that. But yes, there were also fights over toilet paper. A really close friend and bandmate of mine and his wife sort of went down the rabbit hole, or they were kind of outed as not being as liberal as we thought they were, and ended up moving to Arizona and, with a lot of bad feeling. But mostly I was just struck by how, yeah, so how it's sort of been forgotten now to the point where it's not like I was thinking afterwards, we're not seeing representations of this time much in like film and novels and popular culture. It's just like, oh, let's forget about that. But yeah, so it was nice to think about those moments that it did feel like, oh yeah, there is some possibility, but it was like, but yeah, what can we do to really act on that? It didn't, yeah, and there was a lot of negativity as well. But personally, I rather enjoyed having more quiet time. But there was a lot of, but not only that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That normally, if some event like a war or uh, something similarly cataclysmic comes up, you do see films and it sort of enters into the thing, and it is kind of strange that uh, you don't see, like, here's a novel about during the pandemic, there's a love affair, but they can't do this or yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean
mean,
there are some, but very few. It's really like
yeah,
an
you would
attempt
think
at
there
oh
would be
let's just forget everything now.
right. You would think
Yeah.
that there would be an overabundance of something.
Yeah.
It would be
Yeah, it's an
kind of, it
interesting
would be
plot device, if
right.
nothing
Yeah,
else.
it's a very interesting plot device
Yeah.
if you think about it, because anything can go on during that. I mean, criminal thrillers and political spy intrigues, and all of that could have been set in that stage. But for
But
some,
no, I mean, what remains is this attempt to bring up this, oh, it was made in a Chinese lab by Dr. Fauci. It's like they're still dragging that narrative out,
yeah, yeah, thank you.
rather than think about, yes, everything we're doing is making it much more likely that there will be more. In fact, there already is more sickness, and although not of the COVID
Right,
variety,
right,
but the, cyclospora and, whatever, the
right,
egg recall now, et cetera, et
right,
cetera.
right. Yeah. Mary.
You mentioning about how we don't remember it and how people are forgetting it. And I had that experience my last class. Okay, so I'm just an auditor, but I guess it was 2 classes ago. Anyway, we were taught, I don't remember how the subject came up, but the pandemic came up. And one of the students who's Asian talked about how he and his family were afraid to leave their house. And he would get stir crazy and he would leave at night. And this is in Jackson Heights. There's a huge Asian community. It's south of Broadway. Anyway, and I had forgotten about that. And I remember just before the shutdown, I went to buy a Chinese takeout and it was completely empty. And this was a good Chinese takeout restaurant. It was always full and busy. I was like, how come there's no one here? And the people said, oh, we don't know. And it was the beginning where Trump was like, oh, this is just something China's doing to us and stirring up the hostility towards Chinese. And it came out that Chinese restaurants were not, people wouldn't go to a Chinese restaurant, and then later on people were beating up Chinese people, and it's like really shocking here in New York, because people pretty much, I mean, when you consider the diversity, there really is not that much, considering 9 million people, you know, anyway, 8.5, whatever. And when this young man stood up and talked about how being, I guess he was Chinese, I don't know, he's Asian, how he was afraid to leave the house, not because of COVID, but because he was going to get beaten up. I'd forgotten about that completely. And it kind of embarrassed me that I had forgotten about it.
No.
So that's just my memory.
Thanks. I agree that the COVID hasn't been well represented in popular culture since then, with some exceptions maybe. But I think mental illness has come out of the closet into popular culture. And it's very acceptable to speak about one's mental illness in a way that wasn't quite as rampant before then. I remember with Kenneth Rexroth in the 1960s and 70s, he used to say that people were always into drugs, but people were never proud of their habits. And he said in the 60s and 70s, people started being very proud of their addictions and wearing it on their shoulders. And it seemed the same with mental illness around COVID and after. I think it's still going on, where people start to be kind of proud of their mental afflictions in a way that before they used to kind of not make them so public. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Also, Zizek once said, and I like this saying, that why is it that we can conceive of the end of the extinction of our species, but we cannot imagine the end of capitalism?
Yeah.
And also, I liked very much your title of Pregnant Pause. I thought that was a great title for the COVID. And this paragraph on page 254, any pause may give us time to reflect on our lives and reassess our priorities. But knowing that everyone else is doing this at the same time gives these reflections a more collective focus. This pause is shaking us out of our usual habits and presumptions and giving each and all of us a rare chance to see our lives and our society in a fresh light. And I really like the emphasis on the collective in the society there. I should have asked this before, but I have a quick question about the first section, out in the open. Does your title refer mostly to the racism of the Trump administration, even though the title is more all-encompassing?
Well, if you notice that I put a long excerpt from the Joy of Revolution as the epigram or epigraph, whatever it is. And my point was that the ugly things, I start out, the Donald Trump campaign has exposed some very ugly aspects of American society. They're not pretty to look at, but it's probably better that they're out in the open where we can see them and nobody can deny them. So then to go back to my point was general, it's not just racism, but just all these ugly things that we tend to forget as these things degrade. But if you go back, like even 20 years ago, like say even during the Bush, which was ridiculous enough as it was, there were certain things that nobody would do on TV in public. You simply wouldn't. I mean, Bush could have said certain things and people would have suddenly, oh, get him out of there. We were kind of astonished that he could get away with such complete idiocy, and all that. But when we got into the Trump era, it was like, what? You mean you can get up and, I mean, do almost literally anything and the supporters are going to say, oh, it didn't happen, or it's okay. Who cares? I'm on his side, not your side. That's so it's all those kind of things, like just the sort of like I don't think any president in America has ever been so obnoxious as Donald Trump, for example. I mean, that's you have had some evil people in there or some really fucked up people, but usually they were kind of genial, like, oh, you'd have a beer with that guy or
Well, not only that, Ken, but the grift.
yeah.
The
Oh,
corruption.
yeah. Open. Like
Yeah,
it used to
open.
be, it used to be like there were some scandals back in President Grant's day that he didn't do, but people in his administration, it became notorious. And then there was some scandal in the 20s. I don't remember what it was called, and so on. But this open thing, like just so anyway, my point was that uh, I'll read this opening thing. My point was to say that these irrational, bizarre, ugly, fascistic things coming out in the open, that it's ugly, it's painful, but maybe it's good that we have to deal with them. So it says, powerful as though they may be, irrational popular tendencies are not irresistible forces. They contain their own contradictions. Clinging to some absolute authority is not necessarily a sign of faith in authority. It may be a desperate attempt to overcome one's increasing doubts, the convulsive tightening of a slipping grip. People who join gangs or reactionary groups, or who get caught up in religious cults or patriotic hysteria, are also seeking a sense of liberation, connection, purpose, participation, empowerment. As Wilhelm Reich showed, fascism gives a particularly vigorous and dramatic expression to these basic aspirations, which is why it often has a deeper appeal than the vacillations, compromises, and hypocrisies of liberalism and leftism. In the long run, the only way to defeat reaction is to present more forthright expressions of these aspirations and more authentic opportunities to fulfill them. When basic issues are forced into the open, irrationalities that flourished under the cover of psychological repression tend to be weakened, like disease germs exposed to sunlight and fresh air. So maybe that's an optimistic thing to say, but I felt that uh, when this stuff did come out in the open, you can't push it back in the bottle again. Uh, and however disheartening it may be to see millions of people, uh, you know, loving Trump or admiring Trump, whatever. Uh, this stuff is out in the open, and they can't, and it's on video. It's, yeah, there comes a point where you simply can't deny it. And even though we're used to the MAGA people just sort of brushing off whatever, if he lied, so what, or no, he didn't lie, or I don't care if he lied, whatever. The fact remains is that that stuff is on tape. It's videoed and millions of people know it. It's not like, when I was hearkening back to the Vietnam War era, there was a lot of stuff going on in Vietnam or, the Bay of Pigs thing in Cuba, or things like that, that most people didn't know about. And so you were kind of at the mercy of, is there some heroic investigative reporter who will dig this up? And maybe they dig it up, but it takes 2 years to get out, like things are different now. And so I think once that stuff is out there, it becomes harder for that kind of thing to function. So, if we had any uh, reasonable, even just an excuse for an opposition, Trumpism and that stuff would never have got off off at all. It's just that we have this Democratic Party that is, bending over backward to set up for it. So anyway, maybe on that note, uh, please do hold your digital hand up if you've got something. I think I'm going to move on to the last two Trump. Okay, Kim.
I'm just curious if people feel comfortable. How many of us actually came down with COVID?
So I'm not, of course, I can't see everybody, but
Sid,
a few people did.
I'm
Yeah, I mean,
more
I know
aware.
people. I have friends who did, but I didn't, and I think probably once we got the vaccine in play, uh, it was not that big a deal for most people unless you were super sensitive or something.
well, I came down with it and I had two vaccinations. I came down with it after a year and a half or 2 years after it had been around.
Uh-huh. Well, and what happened when you had it? Like,
Well, I had the weirdest phenomenon. My legs, both my legs got very achy and sore, all my muscles. And I thought I've never experienced anything like this. So I did some research about COVID symptoms and found out that one symptom was back pains, which I didn't have. I had pains in my legs, but I did a home test and I was positive. And the feeling or the aches and pains in my legs lasted about 3 days and then disappeared. And then I had the regular cough and
uh-huh,
fatigue, taking long naps and but I didn't have to go to the hospital or anything like that.
right.
After a couple of weeks, it disappeared. Um, but I had a couple of vaccinations, and I do have friends who are anti-vax who refuse to.
Yeah, I've got one or two of those. Yeah.
So at any rate, the other thing I wanted to say was about returning to the office that Sid brought up. This is something that also just really surprised me. Here in New York, it's a big deal because of real estate. So companies no longer need as much office space, which means that buildings and landlords that rent office space, it's not as much demand. So companies would say, and also I found out about how companies, part of I mean, it wasn't like they were getting less work done by people being at home and being on Zoom, but they still wanted people back in the office. Be in the office, I want to control you kind of thing. And it's weird watching that kind of dynamic. People don't want to go to the office. Why should they spend an hour commuting so they could do the same work that they could do at home? It's stupid,
Right.
but the bosses want you there. It's sort of interesting watching all these dynamics. Anyway, thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up, Sid.
Danny.
Uh,
Well, I'll tell you what. So, let's move on to the final two things where we get back to Trump again. And uh, when he was reelected, I wrote a thing called Trump's Spectacular Comeback. And then a year later, I wrote, after we had sort of seen what he did in his started doing in his second term, I wrote another longer piece called Hive Mind Strikes Back, Collaborative Resistance to Trumpian Fascism. And in that, I started out recapitulating these earlier things about, uh, the elections and what might be happening. And uh, so this final text, which was written in November 2025, uh, I'm looking back at the first year of Trump's second term, and this is after he's sort of been much more aggressively fascistic than he was in his first term, where he had was somewhat held in check by sort of more business as usual types in his cabinet. And so we've had all these things that I don't need to repeat, just um, as I said, each day we were presented with new outrages and insanities, all happening so fast it was hard to keep up, even fascistic kind of things. So we're all familiar with that. But then I started looking again when I'm in this kind of situation, I look to see, okay, these things are there. What can we do about them? Or what are people already doing about them? And can I draw anything from that? And what I noticed was that with very little delay, millions of people were doing all sorts of different things to try to counter the Trump regime. The various laws and that he was trying to pass and the various things that he was already doing. And as I looked over that, a little bit like with COVID, where I'm saying, here's this big, massive dialogue of millions of people, and it's confused inevitably, but there is a kind of, when people talk about hive mind, it can be pejorative, like you're just like an insect that doesn't know what they're doing or something. But it has also acquired a sort of positive thing, like however it's done, it's like a collective thing where people sort of work out stuff, even though there's no formal procedures. There's no elections or debates. What is our policy about this? People just start doing stuff. And because of the social media that we now take for granted, but didn't have, a few decades ago, uh, things that people do in one place can quickly be picked up in another place, and something that doesn't work will very quickly be seen as not working without having to filter through a lot of delays. And so I just started looking at some of these massive, more or less spontaneous things that people were doing. And I list some of them, like the No Kings protests that were just done every few months, but had huge amounts of people. And those things were organized in a very loose way. I mean, there might have been some national thing where you could write to some organization or something, but the organization was nowhere near in control. It was just people showing up on a certain date in 100 different cities, or maybe 1,000 different cities. And then one of the most impressive is the immigrant support and anti-ICE actions that people were doing. People who normally uh, would have hesitated to do anything illegal, and yet by resisting ICE, they were setting themselves up to be arrested or beaten up, and in a few cases actually killed in pretty much in cold blood by resisting these masked, uh, kind of stormtrooper-like ICE troops. Um, and that this spread, like one city in Charlotte, North Carolina would have something, and then they would pick up something from Chicago, and then Chicago would pick up something that people in Los Angeles were doing, different tactics. And uh, like I remember running into a friend of mine who is normally uh, not radical at all, just sort of generic, goodwill liberal or something. And I said, "Oh, how's it doing? How's your daughter doing who's in Chicago?" And he took out of his wallet, or maybe it was his cell phone, and he said, "Let me show you what my daughter's doing." And he showed this daughter, who, again, I don't think was particularly radical or anything, and she had some kind of different cap on or something. And he said, that's because she's an anti-ice monitor. And when ice is coming, she blows a whistle, or I don't know what all these things were, like he was very proud of his daughter who was doing these things that, boy, I would hesitate to do. Like, man, am I going to get out there, and be shot or something because I'm impeding, this. So this stuff had been happening among just kind of ordinary people. And the Gaza protests were continuing, and to the point that within a 2 year space, whereas it used to be that the American public was sort of automatically with Israel, whatever it did, now there's like a huge thing against it, including of Jewish Americans, and not just Democrats, but even a lot of Republicans, you know. So, and then there was the Tesla takedowns. Again, that was a kind of symbolic thing, but it was sort of interesting. And the Jimmy Kimmel boycotts, if you remember that, uh, like that was something that nobody organized. It's just that when he was kicked off the air, people spontaneously started unsubscribing from that service, and there were millions of unsubscriptions, so that within less than a week, the companies had to take back their thing, and he was back on the air. And nobody even was running that. It wasn't some radical thing saying, let's do this. It was just a kind of spontaneous people just sort of fed up with the utter vulgarity, the other ignorance and ugliness of it. And the same thing like with the Epstein files, you know, uh, it ended up being something that even the MAGAs were pissed off about because they thought this was all going to be exposed, and then it turned out that nothing was getting exposed. And most of these things were nonviolent. There was a lot of humor involved. Like think of the guy who came up with the frog costume, and then people all over the country start wearing frog costumes, stuff like that. And anyway, I just uh, ended up thinking like part of my text was just outline those things, most of which are not news to anybody. Maybe I gave a few more details that somebody might not know about, but I just sort of gleaned some things that I thought were very exemplary. And, they weren't like following any party line or anything like that. But if you took them in the ensemble, it was very heartening to me, because there were no political groups that you could even claim to be in the lead or anything. They were tagging along behind, trying to figure out what was going on. And then I went on to criticize the Democratic Party, in various ways, and mentioned the uh, people within it that I thought were making a break with that. And that kind of segued into some of the more radical possibilities. I had some links to people writing about what's called social strike, which is a sort of vague, generic term for some sort of movement that is maybe not a factory strike or something like that, but is kind of like a strike where large elements of the population are saying we won't put up with this, and whether they're in the streets or boycotting something. And so I go into those kind of things, and then I end up um, talking about the MAGAs. I said one of the most disheartening things of this, uh, almost more sickening than Trump's actions, is the fact that such a large percentage of the American population has gone along with them so gleefully. Uh, and so I delve into that a little bit. Like, yeah, it is stupid and bad, but on the other hand, you have to figure out if you're in some of these areas where you've sort of been raised in a certain way and you're only seeing certain media and you never hear these other things, you get caught up in it. But even though I say, uh, unfortunately, whether they're to blame or not, this type of manipulation can habituate people into becoming pretty nasty. You know, and so on. We've seen that, nothing new. And so anyway, then I wind up with my what you may think of as perhaps over optimistic thing of saying, as I wrote this, this was almost a year ago, I was already seeing like MAGA start breaking up. Partly at that point, it was because of the Epstein files. You know, you had actually some MAGA people in Congress that were opposing Trump because, hey, you said you were going to uh, you know, expose these files, and you haven't been doing that. So I saw that as the first real crack in it. Now, since that time, we've seen a lot of more cracks, you know, people who didn't like the Iran thing or who didn't like price raises or all sorts of other things. But I end up saying, there is one respect in which Trump's delusions of grandeur may turn out to have a kernel of truth. He may go down in history as the person who brought into the open, more glaringly than ever before, the utter insanity of a social system in which such an ugly and idiotic farce could occur. And then I close. Meanwhile, all of you who have been working against him in such a wonderful variety of ways, please keep doing what you're doing. But don't stop there. End of text. So, questions or comments on that or any of the other things we've been discussing here? Sid, you're muted. You're muted, Sid. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. As you said, your ending was very upbeat and optimistic, but thank you. It was encouraging. And thanks for all the observations about the various things that different people have been doing. What do you have any thoughts about the courts? It seems like that they're the only official group or I wouldn't call it an organization, but any official element that is some sort of bulwark against the
Yeah.
insanity.
Yeah, I noted briefly that there are a whole ton of things that have been going to the courts, and the courts have overruled Trump in almost every case. I mean, maybe 95% of the time. So even though, you know, the Supreme Court has done some things that are really over the top and accepting things. Even they have overruled some things, but a lot of these, you know, lower courts, appeal courts have done that. So that's really good. I mean, some of them, even things that judges that Trump appointed, you know, it's just so crazy that they can't help but say, hey, that's illegal. You don't have the right to do that, you know, and threatening to you know, whatever. So that in itself doesn't guarantee anything, but as long as that's there, it's harder to for Trump, say, to proclaim that he's now the temporary dictator, it's martial law or something. You know, it wouldn't carry the, you know, like if all the judges were okaying that, then we'd be in trouble. And it would be an overt clash there. But that's one good thing there. Let's see if there are people that haven't talked. Stuart, did you have anything to say? Or
I definitely can you see me? Let me turn that on. I thought it was a great ending. I love that you brought up the the hive mind concept. I only think of hive mind, I think of the Borg and Star Trek, newer mythology and storytelling. And I just, this was a much more refreshingly upbeat version of that, where we can, it kind of recapitulates your talk about when people see something and it's obvious. And I went back and read a lot of those memes that you put on your website. And it was really striking that everyone could see what was going on, or at least a lot of people were sharing that kind of stuff. And then everyone could come together and act. And I thought that was really helpful, as well as the social strike stuff. But I am very disheartened by the fact that I feel like everybody is traumatized by the pandemic in the end. And it really didn't help things. It just concentrated wealth, made things worse. And I don't feel like the people that we all should have rallied around that saved us from all dying were actually appreciated after the fact. We just went back to normal. Well, you know, of course they saved us because that's their job, you know. They risked their lives. So I felt bad about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned the memes, I've gone to my website with the memes, and I'm just going to read a few of them. I think I picked out about 30 or 40 memes. Things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. Also highly contagious is kindness, patience, love, enthusiasm, and a positive attitude. Don't wait to catch it from others. Be the carrier. Nothing should go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. If we go back to the way things were, we will have lost the lesson. May we rise up and do better. May we grow not back to what was, but instead toward what we can become. Let's see. Normal, getting dressed in clothes you bought for work, then driving through traffic in a car you're still paying for in order to get to the job you need to pay for the clothes and the car in the house you leave vacant all day just so you can afford to sleep there. While you're sanitizing and wiping down everything, be sure to wipe hatred out of your heart. That's a virus too. You are watching people go through withdrawal from the emotional addiction to the myth of certainty. The future is not what's going to happen, but what we are going to do. The great irony coming out of all this is that the world's economy is in danger simply because people are only buying what they need. Think about that. Suddenly, the whole nation is depending on the very people they don't believe should make $15 an hour. At least once in your life, you will need a doctor, a lawyer, an architect, but day after day, you will need a farm worker. People currently in their second or third home want you to get back to your second or third job. If the economy is crashing because people can't work, I don't understand why the entrepreneurs don't just create more wealth. I've been told for years that they are the wealth creators. What's the matter? Do they need workers or something? The number of billionaires pushing for everyone to go back to work early proves one and only one thing. They don't make their money, you do. Wouldn't it be crazy if there was a large external shock to our extractive capitalist system that proved without a shadow of a doubt that our entire economy runs on the labor of the working class, not the unseen and immeasurable genius of plucky billionaires? Isn't it weird that people living from paycheck to paycheck are supposed to have a month's worth of savings for emergencies, while billion-dollar corporations are so poorly managed they're on the brink of bankruptcy after a week of reduced profits? Capitalism 1970. Work hard, you too can be rich. Capitalism 1990. Work hard and a few crumbs will fall down. Capitalism 2020. You should be willing to die in order to save the economy for the top percent. Are you guys still all in for this? Upon closer analysis, I have concluded that we are not, in fact, quote, all in this together, unquote. We're not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. The lockdown has demonstrated three things. Our economy collapses as soon as it stops selling useless stuff to over-indebted people. It is perfectly possible to greatly reduce pollution. That's 2. 3, the lowest paid people in the country are the most essential to its functioning. In hindsight, maybe structuring our society so that the greediest, most ruthless, and most shameless self-promoters get to hold all the power and make all the decisions was a mistake. If you made $180,000 a day since the birth of Christ, Jeff Bezos would still have more money than you. Have you ever considered the possibility that Jeff Bezos just works 130 billion times harder than you? Jeff Bezos now has roughly $189 billion. Average American yearly income is $32,000. How long would it take an average worker to make the amount Bezos has? Guess. 5.9 million years. Challenge. Try to explain to me how the complex $6 trillion corporate bailout bill was better policy than taking $6 trillion and simply giving all 157 million American workers $38,000 each. There was a $2 trillion COVID package that works out to $6,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. Actual human beings got 1,200 of that. What happened to the other 4,800 per person? Looting? In the middle of a pandemic, Zuckerberg made 3.1 billion and Bezos made 31 billion. Bezos made 38 billion. There are your looters. What's the difference between a ventilator and a bomb? There's never any shortage of bombs. Nancy Pelosi, April 2019, quote, when most people say they're for Medicare for all, I think they mean health care for all. Let's see what that means. A lot of people love having their employer-based insurance, unquote. Have you polled the 10 million newly unemployed to see how they like it now, Nancy? The same people who said they voted for Trump because he says what he means are now telling us that he doesn't mean what he says. A mob of the MAGA persuasion conducted a state house invasion. Though heavily armed, they parted unharmed, and that's how you know they're Caucasian. Calm down, everyone. These white dudes are just waving Confederate flags, carrying assault weapons, and putting other people's lives at risk, protesting their right to eat at Wendy's. It's not like they're black athletes peacefully kneeling during a song protesting their right to live or something. Folks, I feel we aren't doing enough to provide our white men with hobbies. Hell hath no fury like a white person mildly inconvenienced. The spread of COVID-19 is based on two factors. One, how dense the population is. Two, how dense the population is. It started as a virus, but mutated into an IQ test. Imagine if in London during the Blitz, there had been a whole bunch of people going, I'll turn on my lights if I feel like it. The parachute has slowed our rate of descent, so we can take it off now. Let's see. They want to reopen the economy to save capitalism because if the government was forced to distribute resources in a way that ensured our survival, they know we would never go back. My favorite Bible story is probably the one where Jesus tells the lepers to get used to the idea that a lot of them are going to die, and then goes on TV and brags about the great job he's doing. Stock market, a graph of rich people feelings. Quote, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled, unquote, Mark Twain. Quote, all man's misfortune comes from one thing, which is not knowing how to stay at rest in a room, unquote. That's from Pascal, 1670. Now that I've lived through an actual plague, I totally understand why Italian Renaissance paintings are full of naked fat people lying on couches. I'm getting tired of being part of a major historical event. We're fighting a billion-dollar propaganda industry with memes. How fucking cool is that? Since we're all going to die, if anyone is secretly in love with me, now is the time to speak up. History Essays in 2053. Explain the use and role of memes as a coping mechanism during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. You'd think a country that can equip every cop like a soldier could equip every doctor like a doctor. Uh, Extreme crisis is the mother of paradigm shift. And I guess that's enough of that. Okay. Ed?
Hello. Hi. Well, here we are. And I guess my question, of course, the question is what's to be done. We have an opportunity here. But it seems to me as though the direction that we need to go in this great sea is how we will deal with the old Democratic Party and the new one, if I may be so bold. I was happy about Wisconsin, but it kind of scared a bit. I'm seeing some of the primaries go for the Mondami Social Democrats, some of them for the old Democratic Party. I'm wondering what you think about that, and I'm wondering if there's any sort of marching orders or places that we can throw our
No, there's no, and this is not the place to go into that. We've had these discussions forever about, like, personally, I'm rooting for people like Mandami and Bernie Sanders and AOC and
Yeah.
stuff like that to do what they can, and they've been unexpectedly successful as far as I'm concerned. So I hope there's a lot more of them, because if we rely on the old Democratic Party, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah,
I mean, literally, it may sound shocking to say so, but the old Democratic Party would rather the Trump keep in power
I think so.
rather than somebody like Bernie Sanders
I think so.
Mary?
I just want to remind everybody about Mandami. We have ranked voting in the primaries. I thought he might win because I was listening to the polls, but I was stunned. He won on the first pass. You understand how ranked voting works?
Yeah,
That completely stunned me. 51%, and they didn't have to, drop off the least person and distribute the
right.
second. Yeah, so there's a lot of people are fed up with the current Democratic Party.
Yeah, yeah. So even the rare misses, like somebody missed in Wisconsin or Michigan, I forget which one, but they missed by like 0.5% or something like that, with everybody else ganging up on them, you know. So I don't count that as a loss. It's amazing, that some of these people, uh, you know, they don't have to be that radical. I mean, just recently, just at least with an element of humanity and common sense or something, that uh, are coming in there and they're winning a lot. I mean, the only way the Republicans, if they manage to get through this next election, is only going to be because it's just humongous vote rigging and stuff like
Right.
that. Yeah, I mean, if there was a legitimate vote, they would just be slaughtered.
Just to let you, another thing about Mandami, he's got a tax the rich sort of thing. He wants to put another property tax on people if it's their second home, if they aren't a resident of New York City and they own a home or a co-op that's
Right.
over 5 million. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd watching the traditional Democrats saying, "Oh, this is terrible." It's just
Yeah,
absurd.
yeah, yeah. Let me see here. Danny, do you have any other things to say? We can test your audio again if you do.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, maybe I'll try to say what I was going to say earlier,
Right.
which was there was a lot about being sequestered during COVID that I appreciate and enjoyed. And I also need to remind myself that 4 weeks into the lockdown, my father died, probably of COVID, plus other things. And 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 lots of other people died too. And so even though for me, um, even though there was a lot about it that I enjoyed, I like to keep in mind that for other people there was a lot of suffering.
Right, right, for sure. John, do you have any more things to say?
Yes, thank you. In the Hive Mind Strikes Back, under the paragraph on humor, you end with Trump's rants and self-glorifications are so delirious that it's hard for any satire to keep up. In fact, it's often difficult to tell which is satire and which is reality. And I just enjoyed how you ended the section on humor humorously. And on page 274, I thought there was a good point made about issues over candidates. Quote, if you focus mostly on raising awareness of issues, that increased awareness will tend to help your candidates, but it will still be there whether your candidates win or lose. Thought that was a good thing to think about.
Yeah, whereas
And
the opposite thing is if you focus on the candidates and sort of downplay the issues, and the candidate loses, you have fucked away your whole time from zero. In fact,
exactly.
maybe worse than zero because you've intentionally downplayed some issues, so you won't offend somebody.
Yes, and in conclusion, I just wanted to say that I felt in sync with everything said in the book, and I guess that makes sense because the best thing actually that happened during COVID was that your group went onto Zoom because I got to join, and I haven't missed a session since, or maybe only one or two.
Great.
But anyway, I didn't find anything to criticize in the book, but I really enjoyed reading it in your lucid style. I do have one little story I would like to mention because I just got back from Laos a few hours ago. And as you probably know, Laos is one of the poorest countries in the world. And I was in Luang Prabang, a city of about 80,000 people. And they had a vibrant public transportation system with buses, which were free to anyone. And 2 months ago, because of the American war in Iran and the higher gas prices, the government suspended the service. So now everyone has to walk, bicycle, or go by motorcycle, car, or taxi. And Trump's pernicious misadventure has cast a toxic shadow over the entire planet. And this is just one small example that you probably wouldn't have heard about otherwise.
Yeah,
Thank you for listening.
thank you. Let's see. Danny, your hand is up again.
Yeah, I'm following up on John's comment about lucid. I enjoyed as I read the final pages of the book, the ads. I enjoyed seeing the blurb for Public Secrets that said Ken Knabb's two distinctive qualities, clarity and simplicity. ... I thought, oh yeah, he nailed it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that's a French guy who I haven't ever met, but he wrote a very nice article about me about 15 years ago. Kim?
Oh, I just wanted to make one other comment. In your last piece, you mentioned that the main reason the Trump regime, wait a minute, no, I'm reading the wrong thing. Anyway, you make a comparison between Trump and Hitler, and you say that Hitler moved more slowly. Anyway, I was just thinking that we have Hitler and Mussolini as examples. They're already in the past, so there's more chances for resistance against Trump because of that.
Right.
Yeah, you said fortunately there's a lot more resistance to Trump than there was to Hitler, partly because Hitler moved more gradually. Anyway, just to repeat, and partly because we have them as examples.
Yeah,
So-
that's right. I mean, it's astonishing how much Hitler resembles Mussolini, except that he's not as intelligent. But I mean, it's clear a lot of times. I think he's imitating Mussolini. I mean, he that Mussolini once
Yeah, that's sort of that frown.
that's right. You know, it's like it's like a frown that is almost like a punch in your face. You know, and I've seen Trump do that, and that does not seem to be a natural Trump thing, unless he's, you know, and he has read Hitler stuff, and he has to have seen Mussolini's speeches. I think that this is sort of consciously or unconsciously a role model. Uh, Mike?
I just wanted to say that I agree with everything you wrote, basically. I just have my qualm about not emphasizing the wage system, but which I think is something that De Boer was doing, but in his own more poetic way. And I agree with your assessment that the rise of DSA after all this is probably the best that can be actually accomplished in the next few years. But it's not going to matter much, because by the end of the century, with the greenhouse gases accumulating in the atmosphere, is going to be gangbusters. Unfortunate, well, maybe fortunately, none of us will be here to see it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, we are running way behind time on that. You know, what one would hope. I mean, the existing Democratic Party, I think, is hardly going to do anything about this. Number one, because they're not even going to stop Trump. But if people like Mondami and AOC and so on can get in there, there's a slight chance that can snowball, you know, and we can start, you know, becoming more aggressive about ecological issues. I mean, it's not going to happen with any of the existing, you know, political forces there. Well, anyway, I want to thank you for putting up with uh, my book here and so on. That I hope will help to fill in with the other works that we've already discussed last year and this year, and we'll be discussing in the next 2 years, just as a sort of basic thing about revolution and some basic political and economic stuff. So from here on, I'll be sending you out an email tomorrow, of course. But as you already know, we have a short novel by this Egyptian writer Albert Kosari that will be for our next 2 meetings. And so we'll be reading half of that. And I think that will be a little change of pace. And then we'll have an even bigger change of pace after that with H.L. Mencken, who is definitely not politically correct, but in my opinion, a delightful writer and provocateur. And then we'll be getting back to some Paul Goodman things about city planning and so on. And then next year we'll be going on into some other utopian visions and a number of things. So I hope you'll stick with us for all those. And so once again, thank you, and I'll hope to see you in a couple weeks.
I can, thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn off the
You can.
recording.